4 days before he, quote, hung himself, unquote, he wrote Larry Nassar saying that he and Larry Nassar and Epstein and Trump shared a proclivity for young women. Now, he writes it from frickin' jail. I don't know if they're censors, that they read the outgoing mail or they read the incoming mail, but that doesn't strike you as almost like an onion level story of Jeffrey Epstein and Larry Nassar talking about Trump's love of young girl? I don't know. It struck me as quite remarkable.
All right, you out there, we have a real treat for you today. This is a reprise of a call we have every Sunday with some of the smartest people in the universe. Makes Carville and me look good. Everything we learned from them on Sunday, we then try to repeat to you several days later. But anyway, I've introduced them all, and so you know how good they are. I'm going to start with a couple questions. Then James will have some, and then we'll just do what we do on Sundays with our Zoom call. We'll just make it a free-for-all. Everybody can jump in. And no, Jill, you do not have to ask permission. Just jump in, and we'll go from there. Roger, let me start with you because I know we talk about the economy every Sunday, but Donald Trump says, fueled by his tax cut and tariffs, we're going to have the greatest economy the world has ever seen in 2026. He has some supporters, some analysts. Warren Buffett, on the other hand, is more cautious. He's loading up on cash, suggesting the market correction is due. I know there are differences between the economy and the market, but there are some pessimists too. As you look ahead to 2026, are you closer to the optimist or the pessimist side?
I would describe myself as in the middle. After all, this morning, Tuesday morning before Christmas.
Let me back up. This is going to air January 1, which I thought I wrote. So,
all right, my mistake. Okay,
that's okay. Just start your answer
I get
again.
It.
Okay.
After all, we recently saw the third quarter GDP figure, the figure that measures the growth or lack of growth in the economy in a particular quarter or a year, and that figure was 4.5% growth, which by any objective measure is strong. And it was considerably higher by maybe a full percentage point than the consensus expectation. And it was driven by pretty high levels of spending by both consumers and businesses. So through the third quarter, and that's now a while ago, because these numbers are reported with quite a delay, the economy was resilient or strong. It just was. Now, since that end of the third quarter,
Where are you?
We've seen some fragmentary evidence of slowing. The unemployment rate has moved up to 4.6%. The monthly job creation rate has dwindled down to very low numbers, hardly creating any jobs. But the underpinnings of the economy remain good. And I don't think there's much likelihood, at least in the early 2026 or mid-year, of a recession. I think that's not in the cards, at least as I see it. It turns out that the tariffs have had a relatively small effect. Part of that is because the import share of the U.S. economy is quite small. It's only about 11%. So our economy, unlike most other large countries and industrialized countries, is not as dependent on imports as they are. So tariffs on imports don't affect our economy as much because most of the goods we consume are domestically produced. And the tariff rate is, on a given day, about a weighted average 15%. Some say it's higher, some say it's lower, but that's not too far off. And a lot of it has initially been absorbed by retailers or other distributors and not fully passed on to consumers yet. But in any event, it's had a relatively small effect, contrary to a lot of concerns in the early going on the tariffs. So the U.S. economy is in pretty good shape. Markets are very, very, or at least the stock market, very, very high by any historical standard. They've only been higher once in history, which was just at the time of the dot-com boom in the year 2000. And by high, I'm measuring, I'm using particularly the idea of the multiples of earnings at which stocks trade. So it's just a matter of time before there's a market correction. Could be a modest one, could be a big one. Nobody's smart enough to know, I certainly am not, whether that's 3 months off or 3 years off. But markets move in cycles, economies move in cycles, and there'll be a correction.
Roger, you're really describing the 2026 with all the uncertainties, and as you said, you're sort of in the middle, as one that's not going to be a disaster, certainly for Donald Trump and the Republicans, but also one that is unlikely to be that boom, that lift that'll turn everything around for them.
That's right. I don't think growth in 2026 is likely to be as high as it was in 2025. But that does remain to be seen. And inflation, which is an important part of the overall equation, is not much changed. There are a lot of different ways to measure inflation, but the PCE deflator, which is widely cited by the Fed, is running at an annual rate of 2.9% right now. Core PCE, so-called, is running at 2.6%. So
it's 1 o'clock.
Inflation has not moved down much since President Trump took office, if at all. Although I know he likes to argue the opposite. On the other hand, those numbers aren't that high by long-term standards, those inflation numbers. But we see plenty of evidence that that certain middle income and lower middle income earners are struggling. You see that in the retail sales of entities that particularly serve that market. You see that in commentary from fast food CEOs of public companies. And so there's a bit of a tale of two cities in this economy. Upper middle and high earners are doing well and spending well, and lower middle and lower income earners are struggling. I should add that the stock market itself has had a real effect on the economy, because if you have a 401k or some other like account and there are stocks in it, you're pretty happy with what's going on because the market remains right around an all-time high, very, very high. And so that's the so-called wealth effect, where you feel wealthier, even if you're not cashing it in, and you're spending a little more because you feel wealthier. That has also boosted growth.
So we'll see. Let me switch subjects. One of the beautiful things about this call every Sunday is that we go all over the lot with everybody making incredibly smart contributions. George Stevens, you know the entertainment business, or the Hollywood version of it, as well as anyone. You come from Hollywood royalty. You are Hollywood royalty, an Academy Award recipient. What do you see on that front? Is there a seismic change that's taken place in the movie industry? I know obviously not as many people go to the movie theater, but what else do you see?
Well, I think the Netflix, Paramount, Warner Brothers it's a perfect metaphor for it. Apart from the financial aspects, there's a very important cultural aspect to it. I mean, the question facing entertainment is, will movie theaters continue to be a main part of the cultural experience? And of course, it's been a vital one for a century. And now you have Paramount with Netflix having the accepted bid at the moment. But Netflix made its reputation on streaming. Ted Sarandos, who runs Netflix, is a very admirable person, but he believes in streaming. There's a quote where his son is a film editor, and Ted was explained to people once that his son can watch Lawrence of Arabia on his iPhone. That to those of us who love the experience of big screens in movie theaters is a major denial of reality. But Ted has said that he's acquiring Warner Brothers, Netflix, and he intends to make the studio a success, and not have it diminished by his preference for streaming. And it comes to people, can we trust that? I'm tend to give him credit for, he's a honorable person. Failing that, if Warner Brothers were to cease producing movies, it would be reducing by one the remaining four movie companies, and I think the movie theater business would go away. So that is what we're facing with that situation. And there's another part of it that I think is worth touching base with, and that is the Ellisons, who are the financial, I guess Ellison is the second richest, the father man in the world, and he's now fully backed at that investment of billions that he's making. But they compromised CBS in favor of Trump in paying, uh, settling a lawsuit in favor of Trump, and bringing in new management to CBS. And just this last week, CBS pulled a story, Barry Weiss, the new appointee, about the migrants who were flown to jail in Latin America. So if Paramount were to succeed, Skydance, whatever it's called, that would mean that CBS is under the control of this Trump-friendly management, and CNN would then belong to the Ellisons. And so that's of concern to people who are interested in the First Amendment.
Sure be a concern to me. James, why don't you jump in and talk to Jill about some of these issues?
Talk to Jill. I'll ask her first because they're expertise, but anybody can weigh in. So there are kind of four stories this month I highlight, and you're the editor, and how do you prioritize them? The Epstein stories, the document changing our entire strategy toward Western Europe, the 60 Minutes Barry Weiss story, the whole CBS News 60 Minutes story, and the whole renaming, particularly the Kennedy Center. You got 2 minutes to put them in order.
Okay. Order of importance, right?
Just you're putting out the times, whatever.
Okay. Well, the most important is the collapse of the strong relationship we've always had with our Western allies. I mean, that is of crucial importance. And, it leaves you wondering, given the uncertainties of relationship with China and Russia, is the Western alliance, including the U.S., still a bulwark against authoritarianism? And with our president in the White House, that adds an even more urgency to that question. So, I would like to be reading more in coming weeks about that. And, it's related story, and there have been new developments as recently as yesterday of right-wing leadership emerging in Western Europe. So that's number one. There was Epstein and the renaming of the Kennedy Center. And what's number three, James?
It's 60 Minutes CBS whole story, what's happened is CBS.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I'm biased, but
Okay, it's all right.
I've spent my career fighting for free press, and I also write a column for the Boston Globe on Trump and the press. And so that's going to be the second most important story for me, because I think the First Amendment is very much at stake, and that reporters can no longer have confidence at many news organizations, including the so-called Tiffany Network, CBS, that they're good probing stories that try to hold power accountable, which is a big reason why we have the First Amendment. Yeah, they can have no confidence that their corporate betters and the editors chosen by them are going to have their backs and publish their work. And that, sets in motion a whole cycle of self-censorship, which is very worrisome. So, I'm confident that certain news organizations that do not have big corporations with lots of other interests, like the Ellisons, like Jeff Bezos, but that places like the New York Times, which are becoming rarer and rarer, which is family owned and, protects its independence as fiercely as any news organization does. I'm confident that, a few will continue to stand up and report and publish truthfully about things like President Trump, his corruption, his cabinet's corruption, his family's corruption. But, I don't really see a whole, and of course, the Wall Street Journal, and even the Washington Post, with Bezos not being helpful, is breaking a lot of good stories. And, I could name a few more, obviously the FT and the Guardian. But, it's fewer and fewer, and that is frightening, because to have a truly free press, this country needs a robust press. And with consolidation and with local newspapers, especially, going out of business, more than a quarter of them are gone at this point over the last decade or so. It's not, the free press is not broadly in the healthiest state that I the healthy state I would hope it would be in and needs to be in, given the will of Donald Trump to control the press and to lob hate bombs in its direction several times a day. I'm hoping that maybe we'll have a few minutes to talk about things like the president calling a reporter on Air Force One piggy. He said quiet piggy, and has, demean the looks of other women reporters. And then you see the weakness of the companies that have, lavish multi-million-dollar settlements on him, just buckling under the weight of his authority. So it's tough. And, the fact that we do, from yesterday, have this story about, Barry Weiss, the top editor at CBS, pulling or possibly killing a story about the treatment of immigrants at a awful prison in El Salvador. That's, really discouraging.
James,
That-
take it away.
So I want to ask
And then I'm
Rodney.
sorry, and then Epstein. I tie the Kennedy Center because of its symbolism and Epstein, where but little by little, we're hearing more about the closeness of President Trump's friendship with a convicted child molester.
So I asked George and then Roger, and it said, of those 4 stories, which one would you be most interested in reading? You
David
went to
Y.
the
Yang.
site and you saw all 4. Which one would you click to first?
Well,
George,
James,
Roger?
James, I think the way I think of it is, which of these things, which of these things cannot be reversed? And uh, the thing that I always go to when I think of that is the relationships that the United States has and has had for so long with its traditional Western allies.
Right.
I don't think we're ever going to be able to return
Yeah.
to the conditions that existed pre-Trump, because if in 2028, for example, a Democrat becomes president and says to Canada or Europe or other countries we've traditionally worked with, don't worry, it's over, we're going back to where we were before, it's not credible. So as harsh as some of the wreckage domestically is, like gutting AID or drastically cutting the federal workforce or suspending grants from medical research of all kinds and so other scientific research and so forth. I think those can be reversed. The interim damage can't be, but the actual policy can be reversed. I don't think that's the case globally.
Excellent answer. George, you
I
got
was
it?
going to. I was just going to say, agree with Roger that was my thought, that what we're doing with our allies and changing the vibrant and smart relationships we've had that have made us the leader of the world, and that is going to be hard to reverse. I can talk about the naming of the Kennedy Center, which, you can't compare it to the cruelty that the Trump administration with which they've treated immigrants and people and citizens of this country in this reckless ICE brigade. But the just to capsulize or encapsulate the Kennedy Center. At first, it began with Trump lawlessly firing 14 appointed trustees, basically half of the trustees appointed by Biden, and replacing them with cronies. Maria Bartiromo, Susie Wild, Usha Vance. There's the list, and they're totally at his beck and call. And they then elected him chairman of the Kennedy Center, with Trump falsely claiming that the Kennedy Center was unstable and falling apart. The Kennedy Center is now falling apart. It was stable when he did this. And
Hey,
then,
George, can you explain just briefly your history with the Kennedy Center?
Yes.
well, I created the Kennedy Center Honors in 1978 and produced it for 37 years and worked with Presidents Carter, Reagan, H.W. Bush, Clinton, W. Bush, and Obama, 6 presidents. And during that time, not only concerning the honors, but I was very close to what was going on with the Kennedy Center, which presidents appoint trustees for 6-year terms, which with the change of parties means there's always been a balance, and the trustees have always worked together. And not in all of that time did any of the presidents want to voice something, or Trump now picks the Kennedy Center honorees. So it's a radical change.
It really is, George. And tell me this:
And
can it be reversed? I saw where one of the ex officio members has brought suit. Other people have questioned whether the Kennedy family could bring suit. You've looked at this. What do you think of the prospects?
I think only the Congress can, but later, you know, Trump's name will not remain, and kind of the part of the poetry of it is that Trump greeted it as a surprise that the board had done this, but the next day they had all of the gold letters already ready to put up on the wall, but they chose the wrong type font. And so the letters are contrast with Kennedy's, which are much bolder. So I imagine those will be replaced before too long. But I think the primary outrage, if you will, is that a president, the Kennedy Center has stood as the living memorial, as by law from the Congress, to a martyred president. And it has stood beside Lincoln, Jefferson, and Washington, those monuments. And for the narcissism of somebody to choose to put his name on the living memorial of a war hero president above his name is just such an unworthy act, that I think that is something that, is really at the heart of the matter.
James, I want you to jump in a lot of things. Let me just ask Roger one more question. You talked about the fraying of the Western Alliance, and it'll be very hard, if not impossible, to put together. I think that's absolutely right, and it caused for great concern. Talk for a minute about they're the greatest competition supposedly is the United States and China. Who's had a better year?
Well, it depends on whether you're talking about diplomatically and geopolitically, or you're talking economically. In the first category, I don't think there's any question that China's had a better year. China has, and is really the only major country, has essentially pushed back hard on Trump and gotten the better of him, I think, because you see right now, we've just agreed to allow China to buy our second most sophisticated semiconductor product, or chip, in exchange for their agreeing to turn around and buy, again, more soybeans for our farmers. It's really symbolic, because we're giving them the future and to some degree focusing on the past in exchange. In addition, we're so preoccupied around the world on what I would call secondary issues. The new national security strategy talking about a return to the Monroe Doctrine, such that the U.S. can do essentially whatever it wants in the Western Hemisphere, and, tilting at windmills on issues like Greenland, and to some extent Venezuela, and just leaving so much of the global playing field open for China. But if the question is economic, I think the United States had a better year. China, it really faces some serious long-term economic challenges. You wouldn't know it by today's data, because they've continued to double down on a manufacturing/export strategy, and their trade surplus with the whole world is now exceeds $1 trillion a year, even though it's a little bit lower than with the United States than it was before. But eventually, that strategy will run out of gas, including over the next 2 or 3 years when Europe starts pushing back hard on it. You look at Germany, and there are serious, really serious risks to the biggest employers in Germany, which typically are the automakers, Mercedes-Benz, BMW, and so forth, as Chinese products flood that market, including lower-cost cars. So that long term, that manufacturing / export model that China has had is not going to be as sustainable as it has been in the past. And they just haven't made the conversion to a serious consumer-driven economy. In addition, they have a very dire demographic outlook. The outlook over the next 50 years is China's population is going to fall dramatically, just because of the average age of the population versus the fertility or replacement rate. And you can't grow an economy if your population is falling. The United States faces a much better demographic outlook, although we're not serving it with our current approach to immigration. But I'd say China at the moment looks economically fairly healthy, but medium and longer term may not be. So that would be my answer.
James and Jill, weigh in on a lot of this. Okay, let's just go back and forth with anyone. We haven't heard enough from either one of you.
Well,
I am the one who picked with our allies as number one. So you have
did.
heard from me.
I know. I just love to hear more from you. That's all. And
Okay.
also from James.
You know, I'm going to just jump back to the press for a minute because there are a couple of things I should have said that I didn't, which is, you know, the White House started out from its first days doing horrible, restrictive things to the press. There was the ridiculous insistence that the Gulf of Mexico be called the Gulf of America. We've almost forgotten that because there have been so many other outrageous things. But, you know, the AP stood up and others did too. And then they tried to punish the AP and say its reporters, you know, would no longer be part of the White House pool, and ended up, you know, supplanting the traditional news organizations that made up that pool with their favorite representatives from the right-wing media. And, you know, didn't stop, you know, what they did at the Defense Department, taking away the workspaces of the Times reporters and the Journal reporters, and again, replacing them with press organizations that are absolutely going to give them the most favorable treatment possible. And, you know, it's just one thing after another. And the press has, by and large, we can focus on, as I did earlier, on the settlements, which I think are terrible with Trump. But, you know, the press has gotten tougher and is standing up more, I think, which is a good thing, and important.
It sure is. James Carville?
So every morning I have 6, 7 people I call, and then today it happened to be we have this thing. And this conversation is about very serious issues, the Western alliance, the Chinese economy and everything. The only thing that I talked about this morning with people is, can you believe this goddamn Jeffrey Epstein, Larry Nassar story? I mean, that has captured the imagination of people.
Well, James, quickly fill us in. I mean, let me reveal my narrowness. I don't know what it is.
Okay. So the story I called the media, I it's almost like it's an onion story that Epstein 4 days before.
It's a CNN reported story.
All right. Okay. 4 days before he, quote, hung himself, unquote, he wrote Larry Nassar saying that he and Larry Nassar and Epstein and Trump shared a proclivity for young women. Now, he writes it from frickin' jail. I don't know if they're censors, that they read the outgoing mail or they read the incoming mail, but that doesn't strike you as almost like an onion level story of Jeffrey Epstein and Larry Nassar talking about Trump's love of young girl? I don't know. It struck me as quite remarkable.
Larry Nassar being the convicted
Michigan State convicted molesting athletes like you couldn't even believe. If you look
Yeah.
at the testimony of these people at sentencing, it'd make you cry. He might be is hideous, but the idea of these two people communicating from jail about how much they share in common with Trump, because these got to be two of the most hideous human beings of the 21st century. It struck me as a giant fucking deal. I don't know. Maybe I'm.
James, I agree. I talked to Mike Tackett, who's also part of that group, and he said the AP was still trying to there was some question of verification, and the AP and the Times were still trying to. I mean, if the story is true, it's unbelievable.
So CNN's report, I saw it on Mediaite, which I find to be pretty reliable. But if you just think about it, if that would have been at any kind of time before, you couldn't imagine the earthquake that would have happened.